Hello YouTube, welcome to Discover Ross, and today we'll be talking about administrative subdivisions. More specifically, administrative subdivisions from Russia. Try saying that 3 times fast. Administrative subdivisions from Russia, administrative subdivisions from Russia, administrative subdivisions from Russia. Okay, I guess that wasn't as complicated as I thought. Anyways, Oblasts are one type of subdivision found in the Russian Federation, as well as other former Soviet bloc countries such as Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, etc. Though they may vary by official name. In Uzbekistan, they're called vilayats, in Georgia, it's makaras, etc. Oblasts are roughly analogous to US states or Canadian provinces, and there are 47 of them in Russia, but only one of them is an autonomous oblast. This is the one we'll be looking at today, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. The name is ironic because, well, let me explain. So, in the early 1900s, the proposal for a homeland for Jews was a hot topic as Theodor Herzl published a book about that very subject in 1896. Called Der Judenstaat, English translation, The Jews' State, it set out his visions for a Jewish homeland needing to be established. Herzl called for the Jewish people to return to Zion, much more popularly called Jerusalem. Though Herzl called for a return for Jerusalem, there were proposals for Jewish homelands to be established all over the world. The British brought forth a proposal for a Jewish home state to be established on the Mau Plateau in modern Kenya, and there were ideas for places as scattered as Guyana, Port Davey in Tasmania, eastern Saudi Arabia, Albania, Kimberley in Australia, Sitka in Alaska, and even Madagascar. This last one was proposed by the Nazis, actually. Moving on. Herzl himself proposed possibly settling in Cyprus and or Al-Arish, which at the very least are closer to modern-day Israel than any of these other proposals were. Fun fact, Napoleon actually occupied Palestine in 1799, and he offered Jews to settle there, but that's a story for another day. Anyways, back to Napoleon's favorite country, Russia. The year is 1923, and Vladimir Lenin wants to show that even though the USSR's guiding ideology is technically atheist, the country can still be tolerant of other cultures and religions in order to gain influence and support from the breakaway regions of the Russian Civil War. Unfortunately for Lenin, he dies the next year. Joseph Stalin took over the reins of Soviet government and decided to pursue what was more or less the same policy, though there were some minor differences. Stalin didn't really want these regions to be equal and only to be semi-autonomous in aspects, rather than fully autonomous, as Lenin had proposed. Stalin, as well as others in the Soviet government, decided that the USSR should form subdivisions for national groups to live in, with their own culture and religion intact, yet within a socialist framework that fitted the USSR. Seeing Zionism as a rival ideology to Marxism, Stalin also pursued the Jewish settlement project in order to offer an alternative to returning to Zion. Southern Ukraine and Crimea were originally selected by the Soviets for their Jewish settlements, with several districts actually being founded. However, the local government and citizens weren't too happy about this. Keep in mind that the Russian Empire had been extremely anti-Semitic, and Ukraine had been the site of some of the worst pogroms in Russian history. So the Soviets decided to move east, way east, where pretty much nobody lived at the time. Stalin and the other Soviets saw this as a perfect excuse to settle the Russian Far East, much of which had been conquered by the Russian Empire just 60 years prior. China and Japan both frequently made incursions into the area, and they hoped to eventually take this land away from the Soviets. So the Soviet elite figured that settling people along the Amur River would help better control and consolidate the land. In essence, they wanted a bastion in the Far East that would be hostile not only to China and Japan, but also the White Russians of the Civil War. So it was that the Borodizhan Jewish National Rayon, named after the capital city of Borodizhan, and later renamed the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, was founded in 1928. Due to the not-so-appealing features of the land, the Soviets offered private land ownership. This being a big thing, rather unheard of in the USSR, it had the consequence of bringing in a lot of non-Jews to settle the land as well. Nonetheless, about 650 Jews had settled in the region by 1928, and half of them promptly left the same year because of some complications and minor setbacks. Anthrax, dead cows. Sorry. Propaganda campaigns were somewhat successful in attracting more Jews to the region. About 1,200 American Jews came over to the Pacific to settle the land, and by 1937, the region had a population of 20,000 Jews. The Yiddish language was pretty much official, with Yiddish newspapers and streets named after prominent Yiddish-speaking Jews. Though the Jewish population would grow to 50,000 post-World War II, not everything was well in the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. For one, the land was still harsh and rather unforgiving, so growing crops and managing livestock was rather difficult. The common Jewish practice of owning small businesses was forbidden. Many didn't have experience in owning land due to their oppression, and the Oblast was rocked by Stalin's purges in the 1930s. Jews were often unable to find jobs or go to school in what was supposed to be their own semi-country. For this reason, the Jewish population kept falling, especially once the state of Israel was established in 1948. In 11 years, the Jewish population went from 50,000 to barely over 14,000. By 1989, there were fewer than 9,000 Jews, making up 4% of the population of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. Once the USSR collapsed a couple years later, 20% of the Jewish population migrated to Tel Aviv to find a new life in Israel. As of right now, the population of the Oblast stands at a little over 176,000, and only about 0.9% of the population, just over 1,600 citizens, practices Judaism. Compare that to Israel, with nearly 9 million people, with 75% being defined as ethnically Jewish and practicing the religion. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast, though it failed somewhat spectacularly, is an interesting chapter in Jewish history, as it was the first actual attempt to officially establish a homeland for the Jewish people. Even today, it is the only official Jewish state alongside Israel. Today, the Oblast, though decidedly not Jewish, still maintains Yiddish schools and signage in Yiddish. The Oblast today has the world's largest menorah, though with it standing at 69 feet tall, it's technically not valid. It's technically not a real menorah. Menorahs can only be 37 feet tall at the max. And there's an interesting rule that you didn't know and I didn't know. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast has a well-developed transportation network and prime opportunities for economic development, with a well-running industrial sector as well. In 2019, a bridge is planned to cross the Amur River and foster more open trade and relationships between the Russians and their Chinese neighbors. While neighboring subdivisions such as Khabarovsk Krai or the Amur Oblast are eager to form a merger with the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, the Oblast remains fiercely independent, even if it's Jewish in name only.